It is an absolute honor to introduce our presenter today, Jake Hamman. Jake is a seasoned economic, ecosystem, and entrepreneurial development thought leader. He has successfully grown multiple ventures and helped countless others do the same. Jake is also a pioneer and respected voice in the emerging field of entrepreneurial ecosystem building, and has been guiding voice for various local and national initiatives such as Peoria Innovative Alliance, Right to Start, the newly formed nonprofit startup Frisco, Startup Champions Network, and the International Economic Development Council, to only name a few. Our speaker has accomplished many great things, including winning last November's Code Launch DFW with his automotive startup Audix. So without any further ado, I introduce to you Jake. Take it away, Jake.
Good morning. Thanks again, Jordan, for the wonderful intro. So since I'm sure everybody's kind of dying to know, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I am as a serial entrepreneur, disruptive innovator, and an ecosystem builder. So being a serial entrepreneur just means I'm full of ideas, and I've got a bad habit of turning those into businesses. So for my first business of running a banquet facility back in my hometown of Peoria, to becoming a supplier to global heavy equipment manufacturer Caterpillar, and growing One Fire, my company, from a team to 2 to 35 people in just a couple of years back in 2016, to my most recent endeavor, which Jordan mentioned, Audix, which we won Code Launch, part of the Improving family back in December, getting selected as a top 100 Startup of the Year finalist, and joining Capital One's first ever Impact Accelerator. Personally, I love to create and build companies. So as a disruptive innovator, I love to not only keep up to date on the latest technology and trends, but figure out where they might be applicable for my own ventures and really for those people that I come in contact with. This goes all the way back to being one of the earliest adopters of the iPhone, the iPad, Google Glass, even Microsoft HoloLens when they first came out. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on around when it comes to continued learning, but I'm a big proponent of honing your craft through research, reading, whether that's through Twitter, podcasts, news articles, etc. And really, finally, my most rewarding role is that of an ecosystem builder. So, since being turned on to a book called Startup Communities by Brad Feld in 2012, I've had the privilege of helping a lot of communities build, grow, and strengthen their support for entrepreneurs, innovators, and startups. The role's really opened up a bunch of opportunities and doors for me, and given me the opportunity to participate in local, state, and national, and even international organizations, some that Jordan mentioned, such as Startup America, the Peoria Innovation Alliance, Kauffman Foundation, the Startup Champions Network, the International Economic Development Council, Right to Start, and most recently, ecosystem building brought me back here to Texas from Illinois, where I'm originally from, and I'm now launching Startup Frisco. So what's been the most exciting, though, is everything I've done and the doors that have opened for me have really directly tied to my why. And we'll talk about how that kind of goes and builds into your culture as well. So if you don't know your why, I would encourage, if you take any piece of homework away today, is about helping establish your why. And I'll share a video here in a second from one of my favorite authors that'll help make your homework a little easier. So what is my why personally? So my why, when I sit down, take inventory of my life in order to answer the questions, my why is quite simple. My purpose is to better people's lives. I'm fulfilled when other people's are fulfilled. When other people are fulfilled, I have an insatiable hunger to serve others, to serve my community, to connect, to create, and to solve problems. I'm compelled to make a difference and ultimately to make an impact. So you see a great quote from Simon Sinek, who's ironically the author that I really aspire to and learn a lot from him. So next, I want to talk a little bit about, so what does return to better mean? So in the midst of the pandemic, I was asked to participate in an economic recovery program back in my hometown of Peoria. And while a lot of the initiative, or all the initiatives within that were great and wonderful, a lot of it was focused on how do we get back and return to normal? How do we, get back to the way things were, build back to the employment levels we were at, get businesses back to where they were, and get everybody back working to normal. So during that time, I was introduced to some interesting writings, some books, things like that. So, well, this is a great opportunity for us to actually return to better. What if we use this as an opportunity to build our companies, to grow our culture, to better support entrepreneurs and those types of things? So that's kind of where the phrase came from. And really, it's become even more relevant now as we start talking about, and companies start talking about this, return to the office, hybrid work environments, all those different types of things. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But first, I want to talk about some authors that are near and dear to my heart and that have really provided a lot of inspiration for what I do. So in terms of books and authors that have been an inspiration to me, one of them is Patrick Lencioni. So this was a great book that I read when I was starting my business about essentially vulnerability and being transparent with your clients. I'd highly recommend it to anybody, but also transparency within your own team, which we'll talk about here just in a little bit, called Getting Naked. It's written in kind of as you see here, kind of a fable story telling type of realm, but it's a really good, great book for anybody that deals with customer service, that deals with client service. I would highly recommend it. Another one, I'm not sure if he's on, but if he is, I'm honored that he was on to listen today. But I had the opportunity to visit Houston a couple months ago for Code Launch Houston, and for leading up to Code Launch was Tech Rodeo. And I was able to attend a session with Jay and some others, and was completely inspired by all Jay's words and what he had to say and his principles around leading from the core. It aligned a lot with what I've done in the past, building, with culture, leading with culture. I was just really impressed and really took away a lot from that conversation. So it's another, just recent, but great inspiration for me in terms of an author and a story that really resonated with me. And then finally, Simon Sinek, who I've mentioned, he's got some great books that have really provided the foundation for me as a business leader and just as a leader in general over time. So his most recent one is The Infinite Game. Leaders Eat Last was his previous one. And then Start With Why was his first book that I'm actually going to show a clip of next that will kind of set the stage for, just the talk itself, but also some of the things that we'll be diving into detail when it comes to building culture as people return to better. So let's see if this works. Oops. One second, let me reshare. There we go.
Probably the world's simplest idea. I call it the golden circle. This little idea explains why some organizations and some leaders are able to inspire where others aren't. Every single person, every single organization on the planet knows what they do, 100%. Some know how they do it, but very, very few people or organizations know why they do what they do. By why, I mean what's your purpose, what's your cause, what's your belief, and why should anyone care? The inspired leaders and the inspired organizations all think, act, and communicate from the inside out. Let me give you an example. If Apple were like everyone else, a marketing message from them might sound like this: we make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? Meh. That's how most marketing is done. That's how most sales is done. We say what we do. We say how we're different or how we better, and we expect some sort of behavior, a purchase, a vote, something like that. Here's how Apple actually communicates. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? People don't buy what you do, people buy why you do it. The goal is not to do business with everybody who needs what you have. The goal is to do business with people who believe what you believe. Again, the goal is not just to sell people who need what you have, the goal is to sell to people who believe what you believe.
All right. So how do you put that into practice? So Simon talked a lot about what is your why. So the golden circle, he touched on a little bit about your why, how, and what. There's plenty of videos, there's plenty of resources out there to kind of look at that. So what does that all mean, today in today's world as we try to return to better? So think about your purpose. What is your why? And then we encounter things like this. Elon Musk, right? Everybody's seen the news, right? Elon Musk talking about how employees must return to the office. They have to work a 40-hour work week, or else they're no longer going to have a job. But then you start seeing executives starting to push back against that as a tone deaf, ultimatum, and why critics are saying it's dangerous. And it's kind of asked, it's raised a lot of questions for a lot of people, and they're kind of saying, what does this mean? So I think a lot of this has left people kind of scratching their heads because some of the most recent research is showing that priorities have changed when it comes to candidates and workers as a result of the pandemic. So these candidates and employees are looking for in their career, things are a little bit different. No longer is compensation number one as the factor that people are looking for. Flexibility is number one. So that ability to work remotely, work hybrid, that's become the most important thing. Number two, interestingly, is culture. Number three, career growth. Number four is the ability to do impactful work. And then finally, number five has become compensation. So really, if any of these things are missing, candidates and even the employees are either going to leave or may leave a company or decline an opportunity to work there, even if the pay is amazing. So where does that lead us? How do we succeed at making these a priority? I believe it really comes down to understanding the difference between a leader and a manager and how important that is when we're building our culture within an organization. So let's take a deep dive into 7 areas where I think some distinguishing characteristics can be defined. So leadership versus management. Many of you probably heard these talks before. Frame mine a little bit differently. They're not single words, but just kind of thinking through these from a practical perspective. So being selfless and not selfish. So as a manager, as a leader instead of a manager, are you worried about the other people under you? Or are you more worried about yourself, your career growth? Second, welcome home. So making sure that your work environment is welcoming, that anybody would feel comfortable, open, be able to share within your work environment. Watching over people and not hovering. So not being that, helicopter parent or helicopter leader, but being able to watch people that are under your care and watch over them and take care of them. A key thing is being a coach to others, but also being coachable. That if somebody brings you feedback or something that might not be going well for them, or they're observing, that you're able to take that feedback and you're able to be coachable yourself. Patient yet tough. So being patient with people, being patient with your team, but also being tough when it's necessary, having those hard conversations when you need to, when it's a disciplinary matter or something that's not going right, being able to be tough and make those hard decisions when it's time. We'll talk about this one a little bit more in detail, but grow and go. So being able to help your employees grow in their careers and in their professions, and being okay with letting them go. If we're a great leader, a lot of great leaders, they encourage their people to grow to the point that they may no longer fit in that organization. They maybe have a better fit elsewhere. I actually heard a great talk yesterday from Chad Estes, who works for the Dallas Cowboys, and he was talking about how there was an opportunity that came up with a competitive sports team, and when he was working in the NBA, and he actually encourage that employee to go work for this other sports team because it was a higher level position. He had been groomed for that. And his bosses asked him, why did you do that? And he said, because I built a culture that I know I'm going to get another 20 of these people through the door. We're going to have similar talent coming through. So being able to be not afraid to help people grow and then let them go. And finally, being authentic. So being an authentic person, just being human, right? I think we found that goes a long way of people that are just being human, that they're, relating to people on a personal level, and you're kind of relaxing and letting down your guard when you're at work. You're not so stiff and strict when you're in the workplace. So how do we put that into practice? So let's talk about real quick 6 areas in which leaders can start to put culture into practice within your own organization or your own team. So there's 6 different areas I want to cover real quickly. So development, fun, team, relationships, transparency, and recognition. So let's first talk about development. So this the development applies to not only your own people, but to your own personal development. So some questions you can ask yourself is, through this process is, how are you developing your people? How are you building them up? Are you supporting their desires, both from a personal and a professional perspective? Oftentimes we find managers, right, or they're more concerned, as we kind of talked about that grow and go, with losing somebody to another company or even another department instead of allowing them to grow and develop towards their own needs and desires. So to do this, right, and to practically put this into action, it's important to get to know people, to talk to them one-on-one, to understand their goals from a personal and professional perspective, and do what you can to help them achieve those goals. Even if that means, like I said, even if that means that you might lose them to another opportunity down the road. If you're building that development in other people, you're going to attract other people to your team that are going to be of similar mind. And then for yourself, right? Are you working on your development? Are you doing that continued learning? Are you filling your head with education around your industry and how that might apply to your clients or to whoever you serve, and continue with that continued development? Secondly, fun. Now, I don't know if this picture is fun. This would not be fun for me, but the whole point of this was, how do you cultivate fun with your team? Some of the things that have seemed to work well that I've done in the past, right, are doing, offsite retreats. So being able to get out of the office, disconnect from work and do team building exercises, whether that's one day, a few hours, if it's a leadership team, being able to do that over several days. There's lots of different ways to participate and have team building exercises and have fun. That also then applies to the office itself. So are you curating the vibe or the culture internally in your office that you want? Or are you just uptight around your teammates? Are you uptight around other managers? And that also applies to how you work as in a team setting. When you're in meetings, when you're in client presentations, how do you work with your team? Are you fun, or are you kind of just dry? So the next thing is team itself. So teamwork. So how does your team function? This one's really interesting in terms of, how do you function as a team when somebody succeeds? Do you celebrate with your teammates? Do you genuinely care about your teammates? Or do you, go sit in a corner and get jealous and say, man, I wish that was me, or you get upset because you haven't reached those goals? And it's the whole concept of a rising tide raises all ships. If somebody else on your team is successful, you should celebrate with them. Be a team player. Somebody mentioned the other day, right? Together everyone achieves more. While it may be cliche and kind of corny, it is actually a really good saying when it comes to team and teamwork. The next one is relationships. So relationships, I found this personally in my own work when I was building my team, is really those one-on-one meetings that have no agenda. A lot of times when you schedule a one-on-one with a person and you put an agenda in place, it makes them uptight. It makes them feel like they got to deliver, they got to prepare something. But just trying to make some time to have one-on-one meetings with your team. If you have a large team, how much time should you dedicate? We'll talk a little bit about that. But if you could dedicate a quarter of your time to building your team and continuing to grow your people, I think that's really important. When you do that, I think you find that when you have no agenda, people become vulnerable, they open up, they share with you. And a lot of times, those work or those home things carry over into their work life and vice versa. So if you're spending a majority of your life, which a lot of us are, working 8 to 10 hours a day doing work, there are things that are going to affect both, right? Your personal life and your home life. So some of the outcomes of that, right, are, like I said, building great relationships, but also, being able to continue to learn from others. And then you're ultimately building an impact, in your talent pipeline. If people know that that's how you function, that's how you work as a leader, more people are going to want to join your team because you've built those relationships. So that, to me, that's one of the most important ones, is those authentic, as we mentioned earlier on, authentic relationships with your people helps build culture. The next one is transparency. So how much are you including your people and your team in your strategy and direction? Are you sharing with them not just the how or the what that Simon talked about in the Golden Circle, but the why? When you as a leader and with your leadership team make a decision, are you putting yourself out there to be able to give a good explanation to your team as to why you did something? And in some cases, even opening it up for feedback. Are you willing to open it up for feedback, be transparent with your team, and take their feedback into account? You may have a great reason for it. You may be able to, talk to them about that. And sometimes they may have a great idea that you may not have considered. So being transparent with your team, opening it up to them, it builds a lot of trust. And that's one of the key things as well. It's also important in that case to have those uncomfortable and challenging conversations. And sometimes, being direct is more important than trying to hem haw around the topic. So that's just another thing to encourage. Like if you have something that's uncomfortable that you have to discuss, do it quickly and just get it done. The sooner you do it, the better off. You've probably heard, right? Slow to hire, quick to fire. But that applies to a lot of other things too. So if you have to have those difficult conversations, be transparent, have them, and then move on. And finally, recognition. So how are you recognizing your teammates when they do something well? Are you doing that publicly to be able to tell the story, be it whether it's an email blast or some type of message or some type of party or celebration within your office? I think what's been pretty interesting with that too, right, and effective is having smaller groups, being able to celebrate smaller groups if it's like a sales team or a department. And then also the one-on-one, those unplanned one-on-ones, being able to just stopping by somebody's desk, texting them, great job, really proud of what you did, and making them feel special. So I think, the consistency is the most important thing in that case of not just doing it with one person, but doing it with everyone and doing it consistently. And of course, as we all know, the handwritten notes go a long way. Just there's something about receiving that handwritten note that says you did a great job. That's really valuable. And another example I heard yesterday, which was really cool from Chad, was in cases where you might be in a department and you have people above you, being able to go up the chain and tell the higher ups or tell the leaders above you about somebody's great job and having them recognize it. Having, like in his case, he's saying having the Jones family send a personal note to you that you did a great job on something would certainly be pretty awesome to have come across your desk. So how do you implement these things? That's a lot of stuff. There are a lot of things to remember to try to do them on a daily basis. I mentioned if it's possible to set aside, a quarter of your time to do that, it's really important. Building the infrastructure to do so. So does your, do your operating procedures, does your training, does your continued learning allow for that? And try to bring that into the picture, earlier on, or even revisiting those types of things as your company or your department grows. It's important to build that into the infrastructure. And then the engagement, right? Are you staying engaged? Even if you don't maybe have the time, to dedicate to those things, that you're staying engaged with your teammates, you're staying engaged with the people that you lead, and making sure that you're, attentive to their needs and what's going on in their lives, both at work and at home, as much as you can. Even if it's, 10 minutes a day, something like that. And also thinking through, your schedule, right? If you've got, it's an 8 to 5, you've got lunch, right? You've got dinners, you could also do a breakfast. Are there times during the days where you're doing something anyways that you can maybe dedicate, once or twice a week to putting towards building up your people and building up and developing into your team? And finally, how do you building those values themselves? So we've talked a lot about, some principles and those types of things. How do you actually go about building these values for your team? So I want to give you kind of to finish up an example of what I had done with my team at OneFire and how we went about building those core values for our company that seemed to work pretty well and drive us to some pretty quick growth over a couple year period. So it starts as simply as Post-it notes. So when we were about 6 employees, after a few months in existence, we knew we were creating something pretty special as a company. We had work lined up, thankfully, from Caterpillar for about a year out. We had some great teammates that we had hired, and they were just some awesome people. So I had the fortunate opportunity to go out to Phoenix, Arizona for Startup America and visit this really fast-growing startup called WebPT. They were an online physical therapy platform. And during their open house, they actually had a director of culture, which I had never heard of before, which was awesome. And they had actually put together a values book that had their core values that everybody got when they started. They built their interview questions around it. And it was super valuable to help them grow really fast and build a great team. So we kind of I saw that, brought it back to, our office and said, how can we do this? So one day we brought everybody into our conference room. We laid out a bunch of Post-it notes and Sharpies, kind of like you see here. And I asked them to all write down what they felt we were currently as a company and what they wanted to see us become as a company and as a team. So the key thing here, and I think this is a key thing to kind of think about, as you're a leader or leading your team, is I didn't provide any input to that process. Without my influence, we spent about 30 to 45 minutes and our team came up with words that described, what they had already experienced in our first, 6 months or so, and what they wanted to experience in their workplace, as part of their career. So we collected all those thoughts, we narrowed them down, put them into some categories. And for our company at the time, we came up with 6 core values that kind of led us going forward. And then I'll talk at the end here about how we actually implemented those with our team. So the first one was client service. We were a service-based company. We were servicing Caterpillar and other large manufacturers. And this actually goes back to that book from Patrick Lencioni around turning those clients into fans. So I'm not going to read all these, but ultimately, at the end of the day, we wanted to build that trust with our clients, and we wanted them to think of us first when they wanted to do business. So you can kind of see here too, we were naked with the customer, and we let go of our fears of being embarrassed, feeling inferior, losing business. We built relationships with our clients, and that's what kept them coming back to us and helped us succeed and helped us grow so quickly like we did. The second one was more of an internal check, right, about accountability. So if you screw up, you own up. We know we're going to make mistakes, but when we do, we're not going to point the finger at other people. We're going to own it, and we're going to work until we get those issues resolved. That happened a lot. I mean, we were in a very technical business with what we were doing, so there were mistakes that were going to be made. But our project managers and our client relationship managers worked tirelessly to make sure that we were getting those things done, where they could have just kind of thrown towel and said, whatever. But a lot of it came back to the core values that they helped set for themselves and putting those into action. So attitude and personality, right? So being, spirit is contagious, understanding that, things don't always go according to plan. We're not going to be grumpy. We're going to come to work with a positive attitude every day. And I think that it works wonders, right? If you come to work, with a positive attitude, you're happy about going to work. It's not a job. It's, being around family. But being driven, energetic, and being passionate about what you do. I think it's always exciting to be in a startup and being in something that's growing. And we found that definitely to be the case. So work ethic, so going all in. We were a startup company when it's early years, but we do know how to have a good time. This kind of related to the fun side of things. So, but we also know how to get down and get to business, whether it's coming in early, staying late, or buckling down to meet a deadline. We wouldn't ever ask anybody to work late. It just became a matter of they loved their job, they cared about their clients, so they were driven to get stuff done when there were deadlines. So the last two are kind of interesting. Around community outreach, we were a very community-oriented organization. Giving back, so doing donation, volunteering, fundraising, and supporting our community growth, and also other entrepreneurs. So actually out of my company, out of One Fire, we launched a nonprofit called Startup Peoria back in Illinois, and we helped launch our first co-working space. We were one of the 11th city to do 1 million cups. We're doing a lot of things to support, other entrepreneurs. And interestingly enough, it led to us being able to hire people that we met through that community and through our community outreach. And finally, this one made its way into my personal bio, so being disruptively innovative. So we were working, as I mentioned, with some of the new technologies when they came out, specifically in the augmented reality and virtual reality space. But we were always staying on top of, and it wasn't just me, it was our whole team staying on top of the latest things that were coming out. So reading articles, we encouraged people to attend workshops or seminars or conferences, just so that we knew what was going on in the field, so that we could grow our company, our clients, and ourselves. So finally, I'll wrap up here with this because I definitely want to open it up to Q&A. Through this process, we found a great platform to be able to put this into practice. It's called Threads Culture. You can look it up on the web. I think it's ourthreads.com. But we said, culture is great. Performance is also important. But how do we manage the two together? How do you know if somebody's performing, but they're a good culture fit. So what was really cool with Threads is it did a really good job of helping kind of determine how to do that and laid out kind of a roadmap for doing so. So as you'll see here, this is kind of the quadrant that everything ran in or worked in. So what you would do is you take your core values, you give them a weighted percentage, right? And then you also take job responsibilities and performance and give them a weighted responsibility. So when you're doing, also call them your traditional performance reviews, you were actually doing both a performance and a culture fit review. So you looked at, how does this person adapt to our culture? Are they a good culture fit? And then, how are their results from a performance perspective? And what you see here is kind of ultimately where you want to be. If you ideally want everybody in that top right quadrant, that they're a great culture fit and they're producing results. That's ultimately where you want everybody to be. If you're on the left and your core values are up there, but your results are down, I always like to say somebody can be trained in that space, right? If they have good core values and they're fitting in with your culture, they're probably open and willing to be trained. So you can work on training them and bringing them up to speed in some areas that they might be lacking. If they're in the bottom right, you probably want that person to be on the way out the door. If they're a great performer, but they do not match your culture and they're not a good follower, or not follower, but they don't adapt well to your core values, they're probably not a great fit and they're probably going to be somewhat disruptive or maybe a little bit toxic to your work environment. So those people you kind of want to be shuffling out the door a little bit. And then in the bottom left, you just never want to hire those people. And that's where this platform helped a lot too, is where you could put those core values questions and those weighted things into interview questions. So rather than just your typical interview questions around, situational based, outcomes, those types of things, actually building in some of the questions around your core values to extract that from potential employees when you were doing interviews. So great platform to do that. We live by this from an HR perspective and a people perspective. And it really helped us build, and I think why we were successful in being able to build a team fairly quickly. And I would just highly recommend, not necessarily even the platform per se, but just this method of being able to, look at people and lead your people from both a culture and performance perspective was super valuable for our growth. So I hope that was helpful for you guys. It's 10:35, so we've got some time for some Q&A. Hopefully there is some. If not, you guys get some time back, but I'll turn it back over to Jordan and we'll see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Jake, so much. That was really good talk. Currently, there's no Q&A in our Q&A feature yet, but I encourage all our attendees to give you a couple more minutes. If you have anything, please post it. And while we have Jake, he can answer a couple of them. But if not, I don't see any coming in. Well, thank you, Jake, for sharing with us today. That was really a wonderful talk. The recording of the session will be available next week on Improving's YouTube channel, along with our other virtual events. I would like to remind everyone, we still have 2 more events today of this year's Improving Edge conference, so I encourage you to check each one out. You can register for Improving Edge events at at theimprovingedge.com. Thank you, everyone. We did have one Q&A before we part for the day. How do you handle clients that don't share the same opinion of your company and culture?
That's a good question. So yeah, it's an interesting question because your employees could be following it, but if your clients don't, I think sometimes it weeds itself. I don't say they weed themselves out, but you'll find that over time, and there'll be a situation that arises that brings that to bear. So it's actually a really tough question. We had some of those actually, and even internally within one of the big clients that we had that didn't share that same opinion, that flat out said, we're going to take your ideas and do them ourselves internally. So sometimes we had to escalate things, but I think if they understand where you're coming from, they'll align you with the right people inside their organizations. so that you can have a nice match, because it's just not it was not a good relationship working with them when the culture side clashed. And I think part of it comes to when selecting clients too. You can be selective just like you are with your employees when you're hiring for the kinds of clients that you want to work with. It's kind of a roundabout answer, but hopefully that helped. Another one looks like.
Yep. That was a great answer. Thank you. Yeah, we did have one more come in the chat section. Do you wanna take it?
Sure. So what if the company, Rick says, what if the company is struggling to hire the skills we need in general? So putting another filter of culture on our limited possible hires may limit our hiring even more. That's a tough one too, just because of the demands that are out there today in terms of the workforce and the lack. I mean, there are a lot of workers, but the skill sets specifically are maybe hard to hire. So I think starting with that up front, I think starting with the culture questions up front may lead to finding the right candidate, even if we typically start with the skills first. Weaving in those questions, I think, is important. I guess the question would be too: is that a remote? If that's a remote option, or if that's an on-site option? There's nothing worse than having an on-site employee that doesn't fit the culture. It might be a good technical skill set fit. So I think if the statistics are true that people are looking for flexibility first and culture second, it's going to be important to a lot of people in today's world. So I think just asking a couple questions up front, as part of the interview process would tell you a lot, and it doesn't have to go super in depth.
Awesome. Thank you again, Jake. Give it a couple more seconds, see if we have anyone come in.
I kept everybody on for the whole time, so I appreciate that.
All right, we did have one more pop in.
Okay.
Perfect. What are some fun team building activities you have had good memories from?
Okay, absolutely. So, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, just the happy hours and going out for drinks and appetizers is always a fun one with the team. I know some that we had done in the past. We did bowling outings with our team. We had a place in where I was from called Fired Up, where you could actually go pick a piece of pottery, paint it together as a team, put it in the kiln, come back and pick it up. That was a blast, just sitting around with people to do that. Done escape rooms. Those are really great team building activities. Breaking up into groups. It's got some competition to it, but you're also, learning people's skill sets. And what was really cool about that one was the leaders, in some cases, a couple of the leaders actually sat outside and observed, so they could see, how different people performed during those escape rooms, who stepped up as to be the leader, who was the more analytical one. They were super valuable. I'm trying to think, there was one other one I was going to bring up. Oh, the axe throwing seems to be a popular one as well. And then one final thing I did wasn't necessarily with my team, but was with a group of about 20 other guys, is we actually went on a couple-day retreat. And I know not everybody is able to do that, but if you can, somewhere local, or even if you have the budget to be able to do something off-site, we went out to Page, Arizona, in Utah, around Lake Powell, and spent a couple days just exploring nature, getting to know each other, meditating, those types of things. So I think it was awesome. If you have the opportunity to do that, I think it's important. And then I also, to add on to that too, is as much as you can engage, all the employees, or as many employees as possible is really important.